All right, good morning. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Santa Barbara County Association of Governments for Thursday, February 15th. Madam Clerk, can I get a roll call, please?
Thank you, Chair Lavanino. For the roll call, Director Williams? Here. Hartman? Capps?
Here.
Nelson? Here. Can't hear you. You're muted. We see you. Perotti?
Here.
Clark? Rouse?
Here.
Osborne?
Here.
Julian? Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Let me see if I can unmute him.
Good.
I'll keep going. Patino, I see her there too.
Here.
Thank you. Infanti?
Here.
King?
Here.
And Chair Lavanino.
Here.
Hartman is right.
Okay, please rise and join the board in Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, it shows that public comment is next. Is there, do we usually do that now or after the administrative agenda? Okay, I'll follow the agenda then. All right, so are there any members of the public that wish to speak on any items that are not on today's agenda?
Okay. Chair Lavanino, we have no requests for public comment on items not in the agenda, either here in person or on the online.
Okay, that takes us to the approval of the consent calendar. Are there any members of the board that wish to pull any items off the consent, A through L? Any in Santa Maria?
None here.
Are there any members of the public that wish to speak on any of the administrative agenda items? No. I don't think so.
Chair Lavanino, I have one request to speak on item 5H, funding with City of Goleta. So I can read that into the record before we do public comment?
Well, first, let's, I want to pass the balance of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve items outside of
moved.
H? Moved
Second.
by Hartman.
Second.
Second by Rouse.
Okay.
Roll call, please.
Director Williams?
Aye.
Capps?
Aye.
Hartman?
Aye.
Nelson?
Aye.
Osborne?
Aye.
Infanti?
Aye.
Julian?
Aye.
King?
Aye.
Patino?
Aye.
Perotti?
Aye.
Clark? Rouse?
Aye.
And Chair Lavanino.
Aye.
Motion passes 12-0.
Okay,
Now we're going to item 4H, funding agreement with the City of Goleta. Approve and authorize the chair to execute amendment number 2 to the agreement with the City of Goleta that governs the roles and responsibilities for implementing the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program grant to construct a train station by extending the agreement for a revised end date of December 31st, 2027, and by increasing the total funding amount $5,600,000 for a new total not to exceed $17,800,000. Excuse me, we have Ms. Karen Lovelace who would like to speak on this item.
Good morning. Hold on just a moment. We're going to get your mic on so that we can.
Okay.
There you go. It's live.
Hi.
Go ahead.
So this is a bit 11th hour, but in that the City of Goleta just put the proposed train station out to bid, it'd be prudent for the board to table this vote until those numbers come in. For example, the restriping and narrowing project of Hollister Avenue in Old Town was projected by Goleta City staff to cost $1.2 million, yet both bids came in at more than $5 million. If the same miscalculations were to arise with the train station, it is questionable if the city could fulfill their agreement. They already have 14 CIP projects that are listed as delayed. This train depot might easily become another failure to perform, just like the Western Goleta overcrossing. Please spend our tax dollars wisely and prudently and defer this agreement until the bids come in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Levine, we do have one more consent, public comment, Mr. Rick Foster on the same item.
Good morning.
Board Chair, basically, I just agree with her. There's nothing lost if you wait and see where the numbers come in at. But Goleta has a lot of projects that are grant projects that are delayed or deferred because they haven't provided adequate funding for it. And consistently, we have projects coming in where the numbers keep skyrocketing, whether it's the Old Town Bike Path or whether it's the restriping in Old Town. It would be wise to defer this until you see what the actual cost is. Maybe it'll be a miracle and it'll come in cheaper than what they're projecting. But I really think you need to see what you do before you start tying up money again needlessly. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions? Or do we have a motion? Or just,
So motion to approve. Do I need to read the whole?
No.
Okay, motion to approve
item H?
4H.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second?
Second. Director Williams, roll call, please.
Director Williams?
Aye.
Capps?
Aye.
Hartman?
Aye.
Nelson?
Aye.
Osborne?
Aye.
Infante?
Aye.
Julian?
Aye.
King?
Aye.
Patino?
Aye.
Perotti?
Aye.
Clark? Rouse?
Aye.
And Chair Levanino.
Aye.
Motion passes 12-0.
That moves us to our action items. Item 5A, please.
Let me find 5A. 5A, Measure A Strategic Plan Update. 5A1, receive presentation from SBCAG staff on development of Measure A Strategic Plan. 5A2, receive presentation from City of Goleta staff on requested Measure A Investment Plan amendment for City of Goleta Overpass Project. 5A3, approve the proposed schedule for policy discussions and direction.
Sarkis?
Thank you, Chair Lavanino and Directors. Sarkis Kachak, Director of Programming. We have a short presentation today. We're also joined by City of Goleta staff, who will also be providing a presentation on their item. And I'll wait 1 second. Oh, sorry. Thank you. So I'll just briefly start, and then it's a lot of the information you heard last month anyway. But so for today, what we're doing for the board is to provide you with an update on feedback that we heard back in January on the Measure A strategic plan. We're here today to provide a schedule on the policy items that we'd like to get feedback on from the board between now and adoption of the strategic plan in 2025. And then City of Goleta is here today to present on their request for a Measure A investment plan amendment. And then we'll talk about next steps. Thank you, Lauren. This is a slide from last month. The purpose of the strategic plan, in a nutshell, is it's a blueprint for our region and our agency to deliver on promises to the voters of Santa Barbara County with the approval of Measure A. So it identifies all the projects that need to be delivered and the associated funding, schedules, and et cetera. It's also an opportunity for us to amend the Measure A investment plan if there are any amendments included with the update. Next slide, please. So the biggest impact on the Measure A strategic plan update is our ability to secure funding from the state through Senate Bill 1, Cycle 4. Those are competitive programs that we will apply for to help fund and complete the Santa Barbara US 101 multimodal corridor. So we will be submitting those applications later this year, and we'll get notice of the awards in June of 2025. So that's driving a lot of the elements of the strategic plan. Next slide, please. So next, we will review feedback from the board in January. So we provided you with a schedule of items for the strategic plan update. We also provided the board with a preview of how to look at using regional funding that we get from the state and federal government through two funding programs, which is the Regional Surface Transportation Program and the State Transportation Improvement Program. We're currently using that funding to help with match for the State Senate Bill 1 funding, but there's an opportunity to use the funding for other projects as well through the strategic plan. We're also looking at impacts of state policies on our ability to deliver projects after the Santa Barbara US 101 project. Notably, those are the US 101 interchanges in Santa Maria. And then finally, we did receive a request from the City of Goleta to amend the Measure A investment plan for the Goleta Overpass project. So that's also being included with this update. Next slide, please. You can go to the next slide. Thank you, Lauren. So what we did in terms of the schedule of policy considerations for your board is we laid out a schedule of 6 items that will be included in the update. If there are any others that the board would like us to consider, we'd also include them as well. But the first one is the investment plan amendment for City of Goleta. The second one was the one I mentioned about looking at the use of regional funding for remaining Measure A projects, and then the impact of state policies on Measure A projects. So the Goleta investment plan is occurring first, and then we're coming next with the state policies and the use of regional funds for this summer. We'll also consider the need to reprioritize any Measure A projects. We'll do that in the fall. And then we'll revisit the Measure A cost savings policy, which is a policy that impacts all of Measure A. And so that's something that our board adopted a few years ago. And then finally, we'll also want to discuss with the board having a set aside or having a carve out for some funding for Measure A funding for regional projects, or just making sure that we're not programming the full amount just in case there are any need for funding at the end of a project. Next slide, please. So this is the last section of my presentation, and then I'll hand it over to City of Goleta. But included with the strategic plan update is opportunity to amend the Measure A investment plan. So the investment plan was what presented to voters back in 2008 in terms of regional projects that we promised for delivery. This can be taken up by the board at any time, but since we're doing the strategic plan update, we include that process. If there is support from the board to do that, what that staff does is then presents 2 hearings to the public. The first is a reading of the amendment that would be included in the investment plan. Then it would be a second hearing for adoption of the investment plan amendment. So what we do in that process, we do notify the public. So we would be doing a public notice and then giving the public opportunities to provide comment as well. The most recent amendment was back in 2020. We did one for Santa Barbara Metropolitan Transit District, where we changed the project scope for their transit capital program to add flexibility to include transit operations as well. And we also did add project for the North County program a few years ago as well. With that, that concludes staff's presentation. I can take any questions on the content that I provided, and then we can hand it over to City of Goleta. We have their city manager, Mr. Robert Nisbet, here.
Okay. Are there any questions from board members here or in Santa Maria for Sarkis?
Yes, Mr. Director Nelson.
Go ahead, Director Nelson.
Thank you, Chair Lavanino. Thank you, Sarkis, for your presentation. Looking at that timeline of the different steps that we're going to be evaluating over the next year, will there be an opportunity to have a conversation about, the projects in a region, and specifically, I'm thinking about the North County, taking a look at, holistically, the entire list. I know we promised these projects to the voters, but we also deferred some of the changes to this body because we realized that over a multi-decade process that some things and priorities might change. And so, what I'm hoping to do is have potentially a North County workshop where we look at, are these still the priorities of the North County to deliver Measure A? Do we need to move them along? I know that the city of Santa Maria is having a discussion about their general plan amendment. That may help dictate which interchanges we look at, because we may want to not do something more in one area, may want to look at the other. There's been a lot of development with the airport, things like that we should take into consideration in 2024. That was different than when this was passed. I think, we have this opportunity that we're reopening the cycle of the strategic plan. So will there be an opportunity for at least the North County region to have that conversation or a workshop? And, I'm happy to, that we have the public there and have a process, but I think it makes sense. And I'm seeing some nodding heads from my colleagues up here in the north that there's some interest in that.
Yes.
Yes, through the chair, thank you, Director Nelson, for the question and comment. And so looking at the list of items that we presented, we can definitely do that this summer with items 3 and 4. So we'll be providing the North County and the board with that opportunity.
And I guess the other question I have is, we've had this policy on the RSTIP funds for our region, going specifically to the 101 widening project here for a good, decade plus. Would we potentially in this year, wrap that up and then have a policy on how that's going to be equitably distributed in, future cycles?
Through the chair, yes, Director Nelson, that will be something that we will include in item 2, which is the use of the RSTP RTIP dollars.
Okay, so when we do get to that point, I want to just kind of give you some information of what I'm looking for as a decision maker, is us to look back over the regional allocation of those dollars over this period of time so that we can try to start to balance that out as we move forward.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question, and I'm not sure if it's for you, Sarkis, or for the city of Goleta, but if it is for the city of Goleta, and maybe both of you can touch on this, but as we're looking at these different projects, how are we kind of intertwining this with the new housing element update, and what's that going to look like with different traffic patterns based on if different projects get approved or not?
Chair Lavanino, when the Measure A investment plan was approved by voters, we didn't really have too many interactions with the housing elements at that time. But that's something that we can include as part of this update if the board desires that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. At this point, we'll move to the City of Goleta's presentation. Mr. Nisbet, good morning.
Good morning.
It's been a while.
Nice to be here. It has been a while since I've been in front of this podium. Robert Nisbet, City Manager for the City of Goleta. Thanks for allowing us to present today. This request was daylighted at your last meeting, and our Public Works Director was also here at that meeting, and I think took a couple questions, but it was at Charlie Ebling, our Public Works Director. Not here today, he's taken a few days off, but there were questions at that meeting that prompted, hey, maybe come back with more information so we can understand what is being requested. So I am here today. I also have our Deputy Director of Public Works, Nina Buelno, and I have our Capital Projects Manager, Autumn Glazier, here in case there's some technical questions today. Next slide, please. So, what we'd like to do is respond to what the board asked and directed last time, and that is to talk a little bit more about the project that's currently on the books, the 101 overcrossing, and then talk about the project we would like to reallocate it to, which we call Project Connect, so we're going to do that. And then, of course, our request is to make a change to the Measure A investment plan, and so we'll conclude with that. Next slide, please. This map is obviously an overview of the city of Goleta and the 2 projects in question. Hard to see, but you can see the airport, Santa Barbara Airport in the middle. If you go up to where you see kind of the urban-rural interface, that's Cathedral Oaks. So below that is lots of housing. Above that is the foothills. To the far left is the boundary line of the city of Goleta. Far right, you can see Highway 217 going diagonal through the project area. So the square on the left is approximately where the overpass project was being planned, and the square on the right is Project Connect that we're going to talk about today. And I will mention a couple things here. The area that we're going to talk about for Project Connect is considered a disadvantaged community. It might be the only, I think maybe the only disadvantaged community on the south coast of Santa Barbara. And then the other point I want to make, going back to the original project on the left here, I think it's important to see this. If the question is, well, you know, why was this put in then? You know, what was the concept and why is it not important today? I think it is a great concept. And the point I'll make here is as you go from right to left from Santa Barbara, the overpasses are all about 1 mile, 1.1 miles apart, starting with Las Positas, La Cumbra, 154, Turnpike, Patterson, et cetera. You get to the final two, Glen Annie and Cathedral Oaks, and it's 2.1 miles. And so it was a pretty obvious idea, I think, that we should have one in the middle of those, especially given all the development there. There was obviously a lot of retail on the other side of the freeway that had been put in about 5 years earlier. Next slide, please. So hard to see, but I want to just key points on this long timeline. The idea of an overcrossing actually goes back to the 90s. At that point in time, it was a ped bike overcrossing. But if you fast forward to about halfway in this timeline, that's when Measure A passed in 2008. At that point, it was clearly a vehicle overcrossing. And at that point, $7 million was included. I think that's grown to 8.4 today. And the project was estimated to cost $56 million at that time, which was probably a shocking number. That's 14 years ago. You may be more shocked in a few minutes. After that point, the city did start doing conceptual design, and there's a few years there where we spent about $1.5 million of our own money doing design, and I'll show a plan view of what came out of that today. But there's a big gap, obviously, where we hit a point, I think the city hit a point where it's like, wow, this is potentially infeasible given what the conceptual design came. So huge gap in the timeline, fast forwarding to today. Next slide, please. So these pictures don't hugely do it justice, but these two pictures are examples of the northerly side of the highway where the overcrossing would touch down. One of those is Brandon Drive, the other is Entrance Road. The person that took the photo, their back is to the freeway. The point here is because of the grades and the height of the overpass over the railroad and the 101, you'd have to be coming down into these neighborhoods. And so you can't imagine that it would just terminate at the frontage road. The slope down of the overpass would go into the neighborhoods. And that's a huge complication on getting this type of project done on both sides of the freeway. And then, as you can see, there's lots of things that happen with any big project. All the bullet points there are all the various things that have to be done. But I draw your attention 2/3 of the way down the list, the one that's bolded, the right-of-way acquisition is what I want to focus on in the next slide, is what really is one of the biggest constraints to this project. And then the comment at the bottom, this project cannot be in construction ready by 26-29. So that's a big point of why we're here today. It's not going to be ready for the sequencing of money that would be available as it stands now. Next slide, please. So this came out of the work that we did. There's some photos here that, again, don't completely do it justice, but attempt to show some of the constraints in the way. You see that big water tank in the middle photo. There's other photos that show that buildings that have businesses in them are in the way. And on the plan view in the top left, there were two options there, the red one and the blue one. And you can see on the top of the screen, they're coming over from two residential roads, either Brandon or San Rosano. And then you can see the designers did an S curve to the right and then down to Hollister Avenue. And the reason they did that was because of the grades, but also trying to avoid all the buildings that you see in the way, which that was smart. You know, let's avoid the buildings and minimize our right-of-way requirement. The issue, though, of course, is that, again, the plan view doesn't do it justice. Those roads would be structure, right? You have to rise up to the overpass. Those are not roads that we would buy through that business park. That's a structure as it starts to elevate to get to the height that it needs to get to going through there. So huge right-of-way needs, as you can see, either one of those options, huge right-of-way needs. And then, as everyone knows, avoid the buildings, but you don't really avoid the buildings because there's severance damages when you have to use eminent domain. If it devalues their property, which they would argue it would, just showing that this is a huge, huge part of the cost of this project and possible constraint. I would say the project is technically feasible, but it's, in my opinion, not financially or practically feasible. Next slide, please. So now I'll turn my attention to Project Connect. To acclimate you here, this is a plan view of Project Connect. And you see Highway 217 running diagonal. Hollister is kind of an Old Town, or the focus of this project. To acclimate people, top of the photo off the plan is Highway 101. To the bottom is UCSB. 217 is the main ingress and egress to UCSB. To the left is the Santa Barbara Airport, very important transportation hub. And then to the right is the boundary of the city of Goleta. And so beyond the right is Eastern Goleta Valley, and Hollister, of course, is a very important corridor that stretches from Goleta through unincorporated area onto Santa Barbara, becomes State Street, of course. And so this project that has been in the works for over 20 years was all about Old Town and doing lots of improvements there that make this area better and are really regional improvements. You can see 3 roundabouts are included, 2 roundabouts on Hollister adjacent to 217. Down below, a roundabout is created as part of the extension of Eckwill Road. That's a brand new road that will create circulation between Kellogg and Fairview and additional access to the airport. And then below that is also a new road, Fowler. So this was all about making circulation improvements for commuters, for Old Town, and to revitalize Old Town. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we believe, Project Connect is a regional project and it has regional benefits. And here are many of the benefits of the project. You can certainly glance at all these various benefits. There are numerous benefits. It's a huge project, like I said, that has probably a 20-year life to it in terms of being an idea that needed to be done. I'll highlight 3 of the benefits. Number 1, safety. Numerous safety improvements, the roundabouts, bike ped safety improvements, better circulation, safety for vehicles, safety for pedestrians, safety for bicycles. Number 2, the airport and UCSB. Obviously, the area is a major hub, and you got the airport, you have UCSB, and this is all about improving access to those facilities and providing better commuter paths and circulation around Old Town. And then finally, and I believe this was maybe the genesis of this project way before our time, was economic development for Old Town. The real key here was to provide better circulation so Hollister can become a focus for Old Town development and have that circulation. And so again, disadvantaged community here, and this is really key to our vision for Old Town Goleta. And then the shocking slide I mentioned, Project Connect, the project I just went over, total project cost, including lots of property acquisition that went into this project, $100 million. And the request that's before the board today, $8.4 million approximately, would essentially fill the gap for the project, plus or minus, and we do intend to start construction soon. And then the Highway 1 overcrossing, I apologize that this number may be shocking. It's a big, big number, $275 million. A lot of that is the property acquisition that I mentioned, and you know, that we would potentially have to use eminent domain to get there. So it's you know, you don't know what you don't know. Even if it was $175 million, it would still be shocking, and the money's not there at this time to do it. The last line item is just, and the speaker from Goleta kind of mentioned it. We're putting a lot of our own money into this. We've looked under every couch cushion and are putting our own money into this as well. And of course, we do have a lot of other projects that are unfunded, like all jurisdictions do. So we're doing our part to put money into it, and we have a lot of other unfunded projects. It's a true statement that the speaker made. And so with that, my last slide, just in conclusion, 3 main points here. We're asking that the board approve an amendment to the Measure A investment plan, securing $8.4 million to Project Connect, closing the unfunded gap. The 101 overcrossing, we believe, remains an important concept, an important project. We'd like it to stay in our own CIP, in the RTP, and maybe it can be reimagined and not take so much property, and maybe it can be smaller or some type of different overcrossing. But that's still a vision, I think, in the long term. And then the final point is, and I think this might have been mentioned or it certainly can be discussed, is that by making this change, there was going to be $11.7 million in STIP matching funds, and those will be forgone for us and available for other regional projects. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, and thanks again for having us to make this presentation.
Thank you. Questions from Mr. Nisbet? Santa Maria? Okay.
I got a question. I'm just curious about that $11.7 million of STIP funds. Has that already been allocated, or was that just an assumption that that would be received?
Through the chair, Director Nelson, that has not been allocated yet. That was funding that was, there is a placeholder funding for the project, the Goleta Overpass project, once US 101 was completed. So that, if that funding is not used for the Goleta Overpass project, then it would become available to the Santa Maria US 101 Highway 135 interchange project.
So right now it is, as currently stands, it is already allocated?
Correct.
To there?
It's future available funding that has not been allocated yet.
So it has not been allocated. So it's just taking one item off the list of potential allocations.
Correct.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Madam Clerk, we have public comment on this matter.
Chair Avenue, yes, we have 2 requests for public comment. First is Mr. Rich Foster, followed by Karen Lovelace.
Chair and board members, thank you for hearing me. Wow, that was an interesting piece of revisionist history. Last week was a $100 million project, and now we hear they figured out it could cost $275 million. I mean, the numbers keep growing or growing. Years ago, it was going to be $60 million. They forgot about the third approach ramp that was proposed years ago, and it wasn't landing through buildings. It was going to land on the property they just rezoned for housing at the Elwood Station Road. I mean, it's, either way, revisionist history. This is a pedestrian overcrossing up in Palo Alto. They just began discussing it in 2010. They started work in January 2017. They finished it in 2021. It crosses a 2-lane road, a 12-lane freeway, another 2-lane road, and a bike path, and they built it for $22.5 million. Meanwhile, in Goleta, after 14 years, the overcrossing is still listed as under development, and the prices keep skyrocketing. At your last meeting, the mayor told you that this overcrossing is still a high priority, but said, we haven't done anything on it in 6 or 7, 8 years. Why did it take them so long to tell you that they weren't going to do anything on it? I can't help but notice that the city suddenly feels an urgency to make a presentation about this project and how Project Connect is going to improve the world. I have no idea, if you look at that map, how that's going to improve access to the airport, but the project will increase impact on intersections at Fairview Avenue and Patterson Avenue. The Public Works has told us consistently that a pedestrian bridge and a highway bridge costs almost the same going over the freeway. Well, this is a photo of what Santa Barbara proposed last week, a pedestrian bridge over the freeway for $32.5 million, not $275 million. Why the discrepancy? Well, the engineers for Santa Barbara were wise enough to avoid putting anything on the public right-of-way of Caltrans. You know, maybe Goleta just needs to find themselves some different consultants. The city rezoned hundreds and hundreds of units along 101 in Goleta, both on the north side and the south of the freeway where a pedestrian overcrossing would go in. Unfortunately, the city takes a rather lax view of how they use your tax monies. We had to measure B 2022 to raise our sales tax 1% to help fix our roads. And to help push Project Connect forward, they've decided they're not going to use any of that money to fix our roads. At least for now, they're going to use it to build new roads. They need to stick by what they promised the people. The stated goal in Old Town is to choke Hollister down, and I quote one of them, so that Hollister is not a throughway to Costco. That was not one of the goals of Measure A. Measure A was to increase circulation. I don't see how you see Project Connect increasing circulation. What we do need is a pedestrian bridge out in Goleta where these hundreds and hundreds of new units are going so that kids can get safely. It will not mitigate the traffic congestion at 101 and Stork, but it will get the electric bikes off of there. That crossing, even with the stoplight that they put in at Caltrans, is bad for bicycles to cross. It'll give a way for kids to get to school over at the high school. It'll be a way for the community to get down to Costco and whatnot. And this is what you were told the money was going to go for. It was the original plan was pedestrian.
Mr. Foster, wrap up, please.
All
if
right.
you could.
So I ask you that you don't move forward with this switch of money. Leave it where it is, where the promise is, and maybe they can consult with Santa Barbara on how to make it work. I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Chair Levine, next we have Ms. Karen Lovelace.
Good morning. I read the letter from the City of Goleta in today's agenda, and I find it has many falsehoods. On the first page, towards the bottom, it says, the project goals will continue to be increased access for residents on both sides of 101, reduce traffic congestion, and improve bicycle and pedestrian access across Highway 101 and the railroad tracks. No aspect of the newly named GCTIP increases access for residents on both sides of 101. No part of it at all affects that. The project feasibility, the overpass project is proposed at a location that would impact the existing neighborhood and needs further evaluation. They're talking about the Western Goleta overpass. Due to development in the area and proposed general plan updates, 77% of the RENA housing is being put right there where that overcrossing is supposed to go. Due to development in the area and proposed general plan updates, this project needs to be evaluated in order to determine the feasibility of the project. It sounds like they want to make it dead in the water, so this is all doublespeak in my estimation. They claim impacts to neighborhoods at the proposed overcrossing needs study. They've had 14 years to study something. Not only that, the Goleta City Council recently voted to rezone parcel sites that would have facilitated the approach and landing for their overcrossing. Moving the money to a project that intends to choke and slow traffic in Old Town does not improve circulation. Even more egregious is that the act of narrowing Hollister Avenue would throw an even greater burden onto US 101 and freeway interchanges throughout Goleta. This project is deferred not due to funding constraints, but by lack of action by the City Council over the last 14 years. If indeed it were to be, well, it was $100 million, now I guess it's $275. Why is that except they did nothing as inflation drove up cost? Palo Alto built a pedestrian crossing in 4 years for $23 million. Santa Rosa has commenced on a similar project with a cost of $39 million, and we just heard about a Santa Barbara overcrossing. Their failure to deliver on election promises as to how tax monies would be used should not be rewarded. Projects that do not support the criterion for Measure A, increased circulation, should not be rewarded. How are we to believe what they now propose, having zoned away the overcrossing access, squandered time, ignored the project, all while telling you that this was under development? Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Does that finish off public comment?
Chair Lavenu, yes, that ends
Okay.
public comment.
Do we have any comments from board members? Mayor Perotti?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the last meeting, our board meeting, where you requested more information. Thank you. I think it was definitely needed. And I want to thank our city manager, Robert Nisbet, for articulating a lot better than I did at the last meeting the regional need for Project Connect. You know, I want to say this again, that the 101 is not dead in the water. There's several council members that are very interested, and maybe even looking back at just a pedestrian bicycle, which was originally proposed. I can't speak for the board, the council at the time, why they put the 101 overcrossing ahead of maybe the Project Connect, which that was on the books as well as a way to circulate traffic. I can't speak for them, but I have to wonder if they were assuming that at that time there were a lot of folks crossing the freeway and being either killed or injured, and I think they felt very strongly that that was needed. And so they would get Measure A for that. And then also, I do believe they were thinking for the Equal Fowler and the Project Connect is using redevelopment funding. I can't say for sure, but that went away. So I'm rationalizing why they didn't put one more important than the other. And I feel like they are both important. But we have a project that's moving forward. I think we're getting ready to break ground pretty soon, and there's a lack of funding. And but again, I will say that we have not given up on the 101 overcrossing. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Director Rouse?
Yeah, since we did have this discussion pretty recently about the Santa Barbara proposed overcrossing, and it was proposed at $32 million, but that would be, of course, the grant, matching grant of 20% from the city, which we don't have and don't foresee having very, very soon. We also have SB1 funding that we're looking for surface improvements, which I think are more practical and more needed and more immediate, and so it'll serve that neighborhood. One of the main drivers for doing this was to get it into the grant cycle, maybe not for this time, but maybe for the next time. And we'll still have to see if we're going to have any kind of matching funds, and I don't know what the final numbers are going to be. It's start tossing around those kind of numbers pretty soon, you're talking about real money. So I have no idea where it's gonna be. I don't know if we have the same right-of-way issues that the Goleta project would. But I will say that one of my comments was, I hope we don't get it in the first cycle because we don't have the matching funds to do it with, even if it came up. And I don't think any of us anticipated that, but from an equity standpoint, since we do have two other bridges serving the middle part of Santa Barbara, this was a bridge that would, from an equity standpoint, serve a neighborhood that needs to be served. But my first priority is to get the ground improvements down where they're safe, secure, rideable, walkable, and that I think will serve our neighborhoods more quickly and more immediately, and it's definitely within our realm of possibilities.
Director Capps?
Thank you. I just had a question. I've seen the maps and I understand the need regionally for Project Connect, but if you could just elaborate on the safety aspect for pedestrians and cyclists, what this will actually mean in their lives. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you for that question, Mr. Chair and Director Capps. I suppose it's debatable roundabouts, and there are differing opinions. I am on the side that they are safer than traffic signals, and I think there's many studies to back that up. As a cyclist, the longer I sit at a red light, the more nervous I get. And these roundabouts have been designed not just for a cyclist who will go through the roundabout, but for those who don't want to go through the roundabout. So their design, the modern design has wider sidewalks on the perimeters of roundabouts that are both for pedestrians and cyclists. And so you can actually get off the roundabout and get on the sidewalk and get around them. And so for that, we believe that they're safer. And then a component part or a subsidiary of Project Connect is some restriping work that we're doing in Old Town. And that project was a separate project, but is now being combined with Project Connect for economies of scale. And that project is going to put Class 2 bike lanes on that section of Hollister, which we've never had. And so that's really, really important as well.
Thank you. Just a second question, please, would be just, I think it was brought up the last meeting of the influx of units and building and people that will be in both the city's housing element as well as the counties. And how does Project connect with that? How does that help you think that that in the priority list that puts more weight on the need to do Project Connect?
Sure. Thank you for that question. And we have thought about that. It's hard not to think about that. I showed the map, and you guys know right what's on the right-hand side of the site plan I showed. And those two intersections on either side of Highway 217, I'm told, are level D, C, D. And these roundabouts will upgrade them to A. And so as development potentially occurs to the east, that's good for people that will be going into Old Town. That's good for people that will be going through the roundabouts to get on Highway 217 to either go to UCSB or to go back to Highway 101, I think. And then I also believe that the extension of Eckwell will also do that because, as I said, we are putting Class 2 bike lanes on Hollister, and we're going to try to do some things that people might argue would actually maybe constrict traffic there. But by adding Eckwell, again, we're trying to make circulation, try to create an Old Town that has a grid and multiple ways to move around. And so to the extent that's developed and that's a feeder for people that want to be a part of Old Town, I think there's going to be more ways to get around there and go to businesses there.
Thank you.
Director Williams?
Well, I just want to say that I support the requested change. I think the city of Goleta makes a good presentation. I appreciate the comments of the members of the public, and they're very articulate. But I do think it's important to indicate that even though we have our opinions, it's possible for me not to have an opinion about transportation in Goleta because I used to represent Goleta and grew up there. But our primary role here, in my view, is regional transportation and to support our member agencies' priorities. The city has made a determination that this is a priority, and we should support it.
Okay. And
of course, and I would add that it would be untenable, very difficult to leave in place a level 2, level C or D intersections on Hollister, which is a regional, artery of maximal importance. So I do think it accomplishes something in both the traditional sense of circulation and in terms of the longer term need for Old Town to be a wonderful center for the community.
Thank you. Director Hartman?
A question for Mr. Nesbitt. The history of accidents and safety, you talked about prospectively, but could you look back the way it's currently designed and tell us anything about accidents?
I can generally, but I don't have the statistics in front of me. Thank you for that question, Director Hartman, through the chair. As part of the build-up to both Project Connect and the restriping work we're doing in Old Town, we did do a fair amount of analysis on accidents and so forth. And again, don't have the data in front of me, so I want to be careful here. But the data did indicate that it was a tough section between 217 and Fairview for pedestrians, for cyclists, and for vehicles as well. And a lot of what we saw in the accidents, I think going back five or 7 years, was all of the left turn movements. So you have a busy 2-lane each way with a center lane, and you have a lot of some residents on one side, industrial and so forth on the other side, and lots of left turns. And so we're really trying to address that.
Thank you. Do we have any comments from directors in Santa Maria?
None here.
Okay. Well, I kind of raised this as a concern in the last meeting, but I really appreciate the presentation that's been done. So as an advocate for projects that I've fought hard for, that anytime that they're running across any type of considerable right-of-way or eminent domain issues, we know that costs and the timeline escalate to the point where sometimes they're almost impossible to get done. And I think Director Williams raised a good point, is that I look at my role on SBCAG as you try to take off your parochial hat, your little district, and you try to look at a regional, you're trying to look at the thing from a 30,000 foot level. And so I needed to get to that step. For me, changing a name project in Measure A is a high hurdle for me. But after looking at this presentation, after getting all the facts, I would love to see a bike ped passageway there, and I'm glad to hear that it's not off the books. But to try to do the project that was originally envisioned, 15, 20 years ago, I think is impractical right now. And so I think moving this forward is the right thing to do. And I also look at my job up here as it's you're trying to be regional and not parochial, but the folks that represent that particular district, just like I do in Santa Maria, when a decision is made by SBCAG, I'm the one at the end of the day that answers for it. So while I want to see the son of Measure A passed, I think our track record of what we've done with the 101 will answer that question hands down. So I withdraw my objection to moving this forward and would support its approval. So do we have a motion?
Mr. Chair, if I could make one more comment on the bike ped, just a quick one, thank you. So I also watched with interest the item in front of Santa Barbara City Council yesterday, and watched the entire thing on Tuesday, and completely, was blown away and agree that, it's much more flexible, I think, than a vehicle bridge to be able to do that. And I was in awe of their design, thinking, hey, we could try to pull the same thing off in Goleta. And obviously, if you don't need right-of-way, it's a big difference. There's much more flexibility the way Santa Barbara zigzagged the approach down, and then they didn't go in the Caltrans right-of-way. So we're going to be following that lead and looking at how we could do a bike ped for $32 million instead. There's just much more flexibility to do it. And to the speaker's point, I was seeing these things go in left and right when I was up in the Bay Area, and I think for the most part, they're getting ATP funds to do them. So so I just wanted to make that comment that it would, in my opinion, be a lot cheaper, and we're going to watch what Santa Barbara's doing.
Okay, thank you. Director Perotti?
Chair, thank you, Chair. Are we just looking for to move this forward and not really a motion at this point?
Yes.
Because my understanding, it'll need to go to the oversight, Measure A, and then 2 public hearings. Is that correct?
Yes.
So a lot more opportunity for public input.
Yeah, Mr.
But we do need to approve
The schedule,
schedule.
Of policy items that we
Right.
propose to you, so everybody's aware when those decision points will come back to the board. And I do want to make a note that we do have it scheduled to go to the Measure A Citizens Oversight Committee on March 11th. So that's another opportunity for public comment
Right.
as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
So there's 3 recommendations. We received both of the presentations. So I guess the motion would be to approve the proposed schedule for policy discussions and direction.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Moved by Director Perotti, second by Director Capps. Roll call, please.
Director Williams?
Aye.
Capps?
Aye.
Hartman?
Aye.
Nelson?
Aye.
Osborne?
Aye.
Infante?
Aye.
Julian?
Aye.
King?
Aye.
Patino?
Aye.
Barodi.
Aye.
Clark. Rouse.
Aye.
And Chair Lavanino.
Aye.
Motion passes 13-0.
Okay, that takes us to item 5B. Madam Clerk.
Yeah, item 5B is the draft 2024 state legislative platform. 5B1, receive a report from SBCAG state lobbyist Gus Corey of Corey Consulting. 5B2, approve SBCAG state legislative platform for 2024.
Hi. Good morning, Chair Lavanino and board members. I'll be introducing this item before we bring on Gus Corey. For the record, my name is Lauren Bianchi-Clemen. I'm Government Affairs and Public Information Manager for SBCAG. And we are pleased to present to you for this item the state legislative platform for 2024. And for your background, SBCAG annually adopts a state and federal legislative platform to assist with our strategies to obtain discretionary state and federal funds on our high priority transportation projects, as well as to influence legislation to protect our interests. And so when I say interests, that's the interest of all of our member agencies. And so with the latter being the obtaining state and federal dollars, that is really rooted in our Measure A strategic plan. You've heard a lot about that the last couple months. And so that is really what our focus is on our program, and to aggressively pursue outside matching funds to deliver on our commitments and our promises. So our platform is developed collaboratively. We work internally in SBCAG. We work with our consultants, our lobbyists. We work with our technical advisory committees, and we consult with our regional associations. So that's the Central Coast Coalition for the state, the California Association of Councils of Governments, as well as regional transportation planning agencies. So today you'll hear a presentation from our state lobbyist, Gus Corey of Corey Consulting, and you'll consider the state legislative platform for 2024. Attached to your staff report is the draft 2023 state platform, and it highlights, just for background, there's 7 high priority issue areas in the left-hand column with corresponding goals and strategies to tackle those issues. These issues range from protecting funding to leveraging partnerships to enhancing transit and rail. It addresses climate change mandates, modernizing the Brown Act, and housing. So logistically, you have 2 versions in your staff report. You have a clean copy and a red-lined copy, so that you are able to see the changes that we've made this year from last year. The Joint Technical Advisory Committee did review this and discuss it on their February 1st meeting. The City of Goleta raised the issue of Senate Bill 272. It's legislation requiring local governments that receive approval for a sea level rise plan to be prioritized for funding by January 1st. So in particular, the city asked for the feasibility of incorporating that into the platform due to concerns of the overwhelming cost to smaller coastal local governments for those planning efforts. So when we reviewed the legislation, we found that because it's classified as reimbursable state mandate, it presents challenges to include in any advocacy for funding. So despite this, we did add the inclusion of sea level rise planning to our strategy discussion. Specifically, this was added in regional partnerships issue areas. So this will give us flexibility to stay up to date on the updates of that legislation and to collaboratively work with our partners on a regional basis. So in parallel to those efforts, we requested the city consider coordinating with us, SBCAG, to explore what opportunities there are for a separate county, coastal cities, regional planning effort on that topic. Additionally, based upon requests from members of our technical committees, housing remains an issue area of focus on a regional basis. So we're monitoring the Department of Housing and Community Development for updates on RENA with anticipation of the next cycle in the region to begin in 2029. So Gus Corey will talk a little bit more about an unexpected budget cut proposed for $300 million designated for the Regional Early Action Planning Grant 2.0 program. It's also known as REAP 2.0. That could jeopardize local housing and climate change projects, and several regional transportation planning organizations statewide have issued calls of warning of the devastating impact that will have on the housing crisis. The committee members from the Joint Technical Advisory Committee had no further feedback and recommendations for the SBCAG board. So with that, great news. It is my pleasure to introduce Gus Corey, president of Corey Consulting, who's joining us virtually. He's a new dad back home, and Gus implements our lobbying and advocacy strategy consulting on behalf of SBCAG. He is our eyes and ears and voice. Mr. Corey, you are online. I did open the PowerPoint, but I'm not seeing it on the screen, so I don't know if I need to move it over. Over here. It depends on the item, so there you go. All right, Gus.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Director, Chair Lavanino, and Directors. Gus Corey, State Legislative Advocate. Pleasure to be with you, although my preference is always to be there in person. And as Lauren mentioned, the culprit is our newest addition, Miss Stella Rain, who was born about a week and a half ago. So we're enjoying that. Mom and baby are doing well. So just wanted to kind of give you a broad snapshot of what's going on in Sacramento before we delve into the prospective action item before you today, and that's adoption of the state legislative platform. And so the legislature reconvened on January 3rd. Governor Newsom issued his proposed 24-25 state budget on January 10th. And so the first bullet here that I have, surplus, delay, deficit, refers to in fiscal year 21-22, we had a $74 billion surplus. In fiscal year 22-23, we had a $101 billion surplus. And then last year we had a $31.5 billion deficit. But what was unprecedented is the IRS, because of the climate events that have been happening over the last couple of seasons, and we got hit extremely hard, I think, as everyone knows. They delayed tax collection in 55 out of the 58 counties, which represented 99% of all tax payers. And so taxes were delayed until October, and then it was November, and we were expecting about $42 billion of revenue to come into state coffers for the general fund, but we had only collected $18 billion worth of revenue. And that's a combination of capital gains, personal income tax, and corporate taxes. And so the state literally plays the stock market in trying to finance many of our priorities. And so we're subject to this chronic volatility. So now there's a discrepancy between Governor Newsom's number and the legislative analyst number, and that's what the $38 billion versus $68 billion figure refers to. So Governor Newsom is saying it's a $38 billion shortfall. We have $38 billion in reserves in the rainy day fund. They're using all but $11 billion of that, and then they're doing various deferrals. So they're just scoring the cuts, or I shouldn't say cuts, the appropriations into a prospective fiscal year. And so the opportunity to reconcile on that will be on May 14th. For all intents and purposes, transportation gets by fairly easy, and that's because we're not dependent traditionally anymore on general fund revenues. We rely on special funds such as the gas tax and vehicle registration fee, but there are two items of interest that we want to bring to your attention. And so Ms. Bianchi-Clement brought up one she alluded to, which is the Regional Early Action Planning Program. This is to help try to accelerate affordable housing solutions within the region. It's a $600 million annual program. It's designed to reduce vehicle miles traveled, build more affordable housing and such. Governor Newsom is proposing to cut that by $300 million. And the issue with this is that we already have local jurisdictions that have fronted money. It's a program that works on a reimbursement basis. And so, and the reimbursement after a really arduous process with the Housing and Community Development Agency, you have to wait like 3 years to get a reimbursement. So the fact that Governor Newsom is proposing not to defer funding, say 300 million for fiscal year 24-25 and 300 for 25-26, it is a true programmatic cut. And so we're trying to reconcile this issue. We've been coordinating very closely with our legislative delegation and with CalCog, among others. The budget subcommittee process will be underway. We'll have a chance to testify and work with the broader coalition of people, hopefully to try to keep the funds intact and maintain that predictability. We know that some of our local jurisdictions have hired consultants to help facilitate the process. And so they're really stuck between a rock and a hard place on this one. So that's one of the more glaring issues that we're trying to resolve. The Senate Bill 125 funds, this refers to the $5.1 billion statewide pot of funding that the legislature made available through a budget trailer bill to primarily focus on operations in order to avert a fiscal cliff and also allow for flexibility of funding to go towards capital expenses as well. And so the county share, I believe, is $53.4 million, which I believe the board has taken action on. And so the governor proposes to keep that intact. He does defer $1 billion to a prospective fiscal year, but it has no programmatic effect on the program. And we're hoping that that will be true come the May revise. And so the active transportation program, there is a $200 million proposed cut to that, but that will come from a prospective cycle. So there's no clawback on any previously awarded grants by the California Transportation Commission, which is great news because the county has done exceptional in being able to get some of those awards. And so decisions, May 14th is the May revise. June 15th is when the legislature must submit a balanced budget to the governor, and he has to sign it by June 30th for it to go into effect on July 1st. But there's always some budget trailer bills that go on recess in July, come back in August, and the last day of regular session is August 31st. So that's when all business will have to be completed. This is the second year of the 2-year session. So opportunities and challenges for the year. We've got a couple things that we want to bring to your attention. So as I mentioned, we're heavily dependent upon gas tax revenues. That's what funds. Caltrans gets money for the SHOP program for maintaining our state highway system. Local jurisdictions get money for local streets and roads. And then we get money from the STIP program, which is flexible funding. It's one of the few pots of money that's flexible that we could use on the highway system, active transportation, or even mass transit guideways, if you will. But that source is now dwindling, and that's even with the enactment of Senate Bill 1 in 2017, which had an inflationary adjustment for the gas tax. And it's because the purchase of electric vehicles or just zero emission vehicles has become more prominent. So last year, 25% of all new registered vehicle sales were zero emission vehicles. And so cars are also more fuel efficient and folks are teleworking. So they're not filling up as frequently at the pump, and that's having a pronounced impact on our ability to collect and leverage our Measure A dollars in order to continue making improvements for our county's infrastructure. So what has been discussed, there's been this road user advisory task force that's been in existence for 10 years. They haven't done much outside of initiate 2 pilot programs. One was to take a volunteer group of 5,000 people just to get a sense of how much in vehicle miles traveled they were producing on a daily basis. And the second effort is to have a pricing mechanism that's affixed to that. So it's either a vehicle miles travel charge. We currently have a vehicle registration fee charge that's baked into Senate Bill 1, and that's what's funding the competitive programs, which we've been incredibly successful in acquiring funding from in order to finish off work on US 101. And so I did quick math here. I'm working with the California Transportation Commission just to try to get the math right. But If we switch to a straight vehicle registration fee and just get away from the gas tax, 87% of all registered vehicle owners would actually pay less money than they currently do at the pump. And then as cars depreciate, you go into a lower tier, and a portion of the VRF is tax deductible. So it's one thing that's under consideration as far as doing a full conversion, if you will. A vehicle miles travel charge could be disadvantageous for counties such as ours, where we have to drive further, especially for those that aren't in the urban center. So, there's a little bit of a challenge there, but the commission is looking at how do we try to put a finer number on that so that, again, we have this predictability and stability of funding for all of these priorities. The cap and trade program, so this expires in 2030. Two of the more prominent funding programs there that help us are the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program. The City of Goleta has been a beneficiary of that program in order to enhance low sand service. The Low Carbon Transportation Operations Program also helps augment operations, so MTD, among others, are recipients of that program. And so if cap and trade's not extended, those programs really cease to exist. And the California State Transportation Agency can't program beyond 2026 for the TIRSA program because these are multi-year programs. So without that predictability, we have less of an opportunity to make good on our multimodal options. So looking under every rock for what else can we do to help augment funding, there's the possibility of trying to restore the use of truck weight fees for transportation. Truck weight fees are assessed on commercial trucks. It's about $1.5 billion annually. This is for, they pay this fee due to degradation on the state highway system. We used to get it. It used to be put into the state highway account. It's been taken since at least 2011 to pay down bond debt service, which was never the intention of the funds. And so if we got that infusion of funding, that would certainly help our purpose here of trying to finish off some projects. And then staff has been collaborating as the governor is working on trying to implement his climate action plan for transportation infrastructure. There's a new effort spearheaded by Caltrans. It's called the Caltrans System Investment Strategy, CSIS. And this is trying to harness all state and federal revenues to make those pots of money. So it's basically every funding source you could think of to help compel more multimodal project delivery and deprioritize any highway capacity inducing projects. So that's sort of a highlight of what we're grappling with for this year. So next slide, please. So I covered much of this in the previous slide, but with number one, we're always looking to leverage our Measure A dollars against any funding source that's out there. So we need that predictability of a gas tax successor, whatever the state decides that it needs to be. And preferably it's a revenue neutral conversion, so people are not paying more and it's equitable. So like smaller counties like ours are not having to pay a disproportionate amount where someone else gets to live, say like in the urban center, and they're maybe not having to drive as much, but we're having to bear the burden. Again, trying to get the truck weight fees and such. Item 2, the regional partnerships. Director Kern chairs the Central Coast Coalition. So that's the 5 counties, Santa Cruz down to Santa Barbara. We work very closely with them to deploy more electric charging stations along the 101, broadband. We've coordinated with Caltrans, which is an ex officio member. District 5 works very closely with us there. So we want to be able to capitalize on that and telling our story because we've been able to parlay that partnership into success for the region. Enhancing transit service, the tweaks to transit. CalSTA, so the State Transportation Agency, is conducting through a task force discussions on what do we do next post-pandemic. How do we try to modify existing laws so that transit operators are not struggling to maintain, if not expand, service? That's probably going to be at least a 2-year endeavor. There is some relief currently in statute for those that don't meet fare box, so that Santa Barbara, as the MPO, doesn't have to ding operators for not complying with the Transportation Development Act. And so we're looking to maintain the Senate Bill 125 funds. So that's sort of the bigger component of that item. And then expanding passenger rail service. There is a gap of service along the Central Coast. So Losan terminates in San Luis Obispo. Caltrain terminates in Gilroy, leaving a 153-mile gap of service. And with all the talk about high-speed rail and such, we do think that there is a high value proposition in order to have true coast rail service. We have a lot of discretionary riders. We do have a tourism-based economy. And there's a growing demand, and maybe from a cost perspective, it's probably cheaper in order to try to deliver that. So we want to be able to access funds that are currently available, maybe tweak the cap and trade program to dedicate even more money into rail so that we can acquire a larger share and make that a reality. And then meeting the state mandates. So addressing climate change. One of the bigger components here, and this is where Speaker Rivas from San Benito, and by the way, we now have the Senate President Pro Tem, Mike McGuire from Marin, Sonoma. So we have both leaders of the Senate and the Assembly represent coastal counties, which is advantageous, and so we look forward to working with them. But the application of vehicle miles traveled, there's a real dichotomy even in the Air Resources Board about should we be looking at reducing greenhouse gas emissions, or are we focusing on driving down vehicle miles traveled? And in some respects, it's not always possible to drive down vehicle miles traveled. So how do we get creative about providing other solutions for our constituents, people outside of the region, because it's not just Santa Barbarans that are using US 101 or any of our other routes. I mean, we're helping to facilitate goods movement, tourism, disaster response, et cetera. So just working with the administration on smarter solutions here about how vehicle miles traveled is applied, continuing to work on solutions such as building out our broadband network, which you may recall last year that we sponsored legislation through Senator Lamone. It was Senate Bill 825, which allows us to be a direct recipient of any broadband grants to help out with finishing off first and last mile broadband service. Caltrans is responsible for middle mile work. And so that's now a statewide bill. So we've been for several years, especially under Director Kern's direction, working with Ms. Bianchi Clement, we've tried to think outside the box here as far as what more can we do to help meet these statewide goals. And just two more quick ones. Virtual meetings we have on here. I know that there's legislation, it's AB 817 that's going through the process that would allow the executive committee and citizens advisory committees to continue to meet virtually. These are entities that don't have the final decision making authority. So that's making its way through the Senate. And that would hopefully make it easier for more public participation. And then the last bullet on here, playing with House money, was what Ms. Bianchi Clement had mentioned in trying to retain the REAP funding because it's sort of a penny wise and pound foolish decision to take $300 million across the board statewide, irrespective of the status of where a project is, even if you have a signed agreement with HCD. So on March 20th, we'll be going to Sacramento for the Central Coast Coalition Legislative Day, and very much appreciate Director Hartman volunteering to participate there along with staff. And so we meet with the entirety of our Central Coast delegation and folks from the administration, Caltrans, CTC, and it's just, to show you who the members are here. So I'm in the process of putting together that itinerary. So the action item before you, Mr. Chair and members, is to approve the state legislative platform and accept my report. So I'll stop right there, and I'm happy to take any questions that folks may have. Thank you so much.
Okay. Do any board members have any questions for Mr. Khoury? Anybody in Santa Maria?
None here.
All right. Thank you very much, Gus. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That takes us to 5C. Madam
Chair,
Clerk?
just,
Oh,
you
is
know,
there any public
there's no
comment on
public
this
comment
matter?
either. Yeah.
I thought you got me. All right, you got me. 5C.
5C.
Chair, can,
We've taken the motion.
Oh, we got to approve the whole.
Yeah.
Yes.
So moved.
All right.
Who is that?
Second.
Who was the
Who was the
mover?
motion?
Joan?
I was the second.
It was Alice and
Alice
in
and
thanks,
Santa.
Alice.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, moved by
Okay.
Director Patino, second by Hartman.
Great. Roll call vote. Director Williams.
Aye.
Caps.
Aye.
Hartman.
Aye.
Nelson.
Aye.
Thank you. Osborne.
Aye.
Infante.
Aye.
Julian.
Aye.
King.
Aye.
Patino.
Aye.
Barodi.
Aye.
Clark.
Aye.
Rouse.
Aye.
And Chair Lavanino.
Aye.
Motion passes 13-0.
Excellent.
Now we'll go to 5C. Draft 2024 Federal Legislative Platform. 5C1, receive a report from SBCAG's federal lobbyist Don Gilchrist of Thomas Walters and Associates. 5C2, approve SBCAG's Federal Legislative Platform for 2024.
Hi, Dawn. And our
Please
apologies to Miss Gilchrist for making you travel on Valentine's Day. We
Appreciate that.
I'll do a brief introduction. Dawn doesn't need any further introduction, frankly, but as discussed in the previous item, much of SBCAG's legislative program and strategies, again, are rooted in the Measure A strategic plan. And so when you talk about that, you also think about how we can be successful as a team, and to be successful as a team, to have people like Gus and Dawn on our side and kind of working through those state and federal government processes. So like the state platform presentation, we do a collaborative effort to bring this 2024 copy to you of the federal platform. You'll hear the presentation from Dawn and then take an action on adopting the platform. So attached to your staff report, again, you have the red line copy, the clean copy of both platforms. There's 7 high priority areas outlined in there, and the corresponding goals and strategies of how we're going to tackle those issue areas. So our priority areas include several different funding opportunities that we're looking at on a federal level, augmenting existing funding that we have, like the Highway Trust Fund, federal gas tax, and then innovative financing opportunities. We also speak to engaging in regional partnerships, and so being responsive to passenger rail and transit, and climate resiliency, EV, clean energy, and commuter tax benefits. And then our Joint Technical Advisory Committee also discussed this on February 1st. They did not have any additional feedback or recommendations for consideration by the board. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Don Gilchrist, President of Thomas Walters and Associates. And he's our eyes and ears in the nation's capital. So Don.
Thank you very much, Chair Lavanino, members of the board. Very good to be back here in the county to see all of you again. Don Gilchrist with Thomas Walters and Associates, and we're going to talk a little bit about your federal platform. If we go to thank you for advancing that slide. I just wanted to start with a recap as we think about what took place last year. I think that's some helpful context for your discussion about your platform today. It was a difficult year, 2023. There was a lot of delays. Congress has carried over quite a bit of legislation into this year to try to finish it up, and that includes the very important task of trying to complete the fiscal year 2024 appropriations bills. Those bills were held up by repeated disputes over funding levels. They were also delayed in part because of a House leadership crisis, which seems so long ago, but we saw Speaker McCarthy ousted last year, and now Speaker Johnson is trying to lead the House Republicans. He's encountering many of the same challenges moving legislation. The good news is that at the end of the day, in early January, there was a budget agreement that was announced by congressional leaders that set the overall spending limits for the appropriations bills, and that's the key step to allow things to start moving forward. Under that agreement, defense spending is going to increase by 3%, and non-defense spending will stay at the same level as the previous year. That isn't the spending that increases that we would have preferred, and it's certainly not what congressional Democrats would prefer. But it's important to note that's a very clear repudiation of the deep spending cuts that House Republicans pushed pretty aggressively throughout 2023. And that fact is very concerning to the right wing in the House. Speaker Johnson is kind of on thin ice with the House Republican Conference these days. He's having trouble leading floor proceedings, and oftentimes major legislation is needing a lot of votes from Democratic members to advance. So very interesting dynamic. That dynamic is probably going to carry over throughout this year, and that has some impacts for your platform that you're looking at. The budget agreement, despite it all, does appear to be holding together, and that's good news. We expect to see the appropriations bills finished up by the first week in March. And if you just think about all that has happened, the kind of the really important thing I would like to shine a flashlight on is how important the bipartisan infrastructure law has been in all of this. That legislation, which was enacted in 2021, did several very important things for SBCAG. One is it authorized federal surface transportation programs for 5 years. The second thing it did was it increased your transportation formula dollars by 30%. And then the third thing is that it appropriated a lot of money, billions of dollars, for transportation grant programs and other programs such as broadband, which are very, very important for your federal platform. Those gains are on the books. They're enacted into law, and despite all of the dysfunction that we saw, they were the safety net for SBCAG. And so that's very, very, very good news. And it will be important to remember that as we approve look at the platform for this year. If you go to the next slide, please. We do want to look a little bit more carefully at transportation appropriations, since that's so important for SBCAG. And I do want to start by saying that throughout all of the difficulties, Representative Carbajal and California senators were great to work with and have provided us a lot of support for your funding priorities. And there is pretty good news on transportation appropriations. As I said, both the House and the Senate bills continue the transportation formula funding that was enacted in the infrastructure law. Nobody tried to touch that last year, and that's good news. House Republicans did try to cut $7 billion out of the transportation grant programs. And this was a difficult fight throughout the year. We think that the budget agreement is going to mean that most of those cuts will not happen. We won't really know until they write that bill and bring it to the floor, probably at the end of this month. It's being written right now. We don't know the details. But I think it's going to be mostly good news for SBCAG. And then another bright spot that I did want to mention is that Congress is continuing the process of allowing members to request projects in the appropriations bills. Senator Feinstein and Senator Padilla supported your request for funding for the East Cabrillo Boulevard project. Unfortunately, the Senate Appropriations Committee did not include that on their short list of projects in the bill, but we're taking another look at it and regrouping for perhaps another round as we look forward to FY25. Next slide, please. I wanted to give you a little more detail on appropriations so you can see the difference between the House and the Senate approach. If you just look at the first line there, the raised grants, the House Appropriations Committee proposed to add no money for those important highway and multimodal grant program. Infra and Mega really weren't impacted by this, and that illustrates that they get their money out of the infrastructure law, not out of the annual appropriations bill. So those two bills, those two laws work together. And if we advance to the next slide, you see the same information presented a little bit differently by combining those two streams of money. So again, raise would have been cut by the House, but because of the infrastructure law, there still would have been $1.5 billion available. So that's the importance of the infrastructure law for your priorities. Some of the proposed cuts were quite severe in the area of rail and transit, and they also would have affected these programs that fund highway multimodal projects. If we could go to the next slide, thank you. As I said, we think the budget agreement is going to hold together and will prevent most of those cuts. We want to see the appropriations process brought to a conclusion here at the end of this month or early March. But then we're going to have to quickly pivot to FY25. I think a lot of this dynamic that we saw last year of fighting over funding levels is going to return. It'll be a very partisan year. But what we have seen is that the support for transportation infrastructure spending is strong and it is bipartisan. And so I think we'll have a very good result in the end, probably in a lame duck session on Christmas Eve. But although it'll be a difficult year, I do think there's going to be some good opportunities for SBCAG in 2024. Just to summarize about your platform, the challenges and the opportunities will be very similar to last year. And we can summarize your platform with 3 or 4 bullet points. Primarily, we want to continue to protect the infrastructure law and see that fully implemented. On top of that, we would like to add money from the annual appropriations process to these programs, and so we'll be supporting that. We want to see if there's any grants programs at Department of Transportation or in the area of broadband and others that we could perhaps participate in, and expecting that members will be able to request projects. We will be looking to work with our local delegation to see if there are any opportunities for your specific projects to be included in the appropriations bills. So that's it in a nutshell as we look forward to this year. I'm looking forward to members of the board and staff coming to DC at the end of February. I think that'll be a perfect time to be there to engage on these issues. And it will be a difficult year, challenging year, but I do think in the end it'll be a very good year for SBCAG. So I'll pause there and see if there are any questions that I can answer about your federal platform.
Great. Any directors have questions? Mr. Gilchrist, how about in Santa Maria?
None here.
Okay, I'm just curious, because I didn't print out the entire packet. Do we have a list of the appropriation requests that we're going to be asking for yet, or has that been determined yet?
Chair, with the FY24 appropriations bills still not finalized, we can't really start the next process yet. Okay. We're waiting to see what the House and Senate Appropriations Committees release in terms of guidelines. There are important information in there about deadlines, but also what they will do and what they won't do. So
wait for that to match up.
We have been given some thought to it. It'll probably be something that we are able to talk a little bit about during your trip to DC, but it's best to let's wait and see what they give us in terms of the rules, and then we'll try to help you position yourself to succeed.
Excellent.
So we have a slate
sure we do.
of things that we're interested in that we can vet and, and work as Don said with the guidelines and how it all works. And it takes into account all the member agency priorities and kind of what we're looking at. Again, vetted through the Measure A strategic plan process and coordinated internally with SBCAG. So.
Perfect. Okay. Do we have any public comment on this matter?
Chair Lavanino, we have no requests for public comment.
Okay, thank you. Can I get a motion to receive the report and approve the legislative platform?
So moved.
Moved by Director Osborne.
And I'll second.
Second by Director Capps. Roll call, please.
Director Williams?
Aye.
Capps?
Aye.
Hartman?
Aye.
Nelson?
Aye.
Osborne?
Aye.
Infante?
Aye.
Julian?
Aye.
King?
Aye.
Patino?
Aye.
Perotti?
Aye.
Clark?
Aye.
Rouse?
Aye.
And Chair Lavanino.
Aye.
Motion passes 13-0.
Okay, that takes us to 5D.
5D, regional broadband. 5D1, receive an update on regional broadband activities being undertaken by SBCAG and partners. 5D2, approve and authorize the executive director to execute an agreement similar to attached and based upon review and concurrence by legal counsel with Environmental Science Associates in the amount not to exceed of $350,000 to complete a programmatic environmental impact report for regional broadband with funding from SBCAG and the County of Santa Barbara's local agency technical assistance grant with a period of performance ending December 31st, 2025. 5D3, approve and authorize executive director to, in accordance with the agreement, sign task orders to implement the work to complete the PEIR, suspend performance for convenience, Section 33, and execute immaterial amendments, Section 34.
That's it.
That was a
All right.
mouthful. All right. Yeah.
All right, good morning. Good morning, Chair Lavanino and board members, Fred Luna of SBCAG staff. So today's presentation will, well, here's an outline of what I'm gonna cover today. So basically, real quickly go over major milestones and progress we've made on regional activities on broadband, and then spend a little bit of time focusing in on our commitment to deliver under the 2-year grant of the local agency technical assistance grant that we received in cooperation with the county. So there's 3 major work tasks, so I have a slide for each of those. And then talk about next steps under that 2-year program. Really, what we know now and what we're thinking we're going to do, but it's always evolving, and there's always new things and opportunities that are being added and possibilities. So certainly would take any comments on that, and then go over today's recommendations. Next slide. So these next 2 slides really focus in on kind of a chronology of major milestones that have occurred to date. If the board just focus on those last 2, with the major milestone of adoption of the countywide broadband strategic plan in December that really set forth our opportunity to implement items at a regional broadband level. Our first kind of major effort there was partnering with the County of Santa Barbara, and we received a local agency technical assistance grant in the order of $1 million from the California Public Utilities Commission. And that allowed us to begin some implementation efforts. Next slide. And then these 4 milestones really focus on some progress we've made in the last 6 months. So in September of last year, we brought to this board a request to allow staff to release requests for proposals to hire consultants in 2 different areas. Programmatic EIR, this was really a countywide effort to establish an environmental baseline for future last mile installations. And then additional high-level design, which is also a broadband activity to do that design for those last mile installations. Also last summer, SBCAG had an opportunity along with the county to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the Golden State Connect Authority on behalf of, so that allowed us to be nimbly in a position to apply for a funding opportunity that was available at the end of September from the California Public Utilities Commission. It was called the Federal Funding Account. And so we were able to have the board approve an MOU. The Golden State Connect Authority developed a high-level design. They did some environmental screening, and we were able to include 4 priority locations from the broadband strategic plan in our funding application. We're still waiting to hear, and I'll touch on that in a second in a little bit more detail. In October, we had a discussion with this board about the third kind of part of the work task was how does SBCAG formalize its role as the regional broadband authority, if at all? And so at that time, County Council or SBCAG Council brought together some options, and we have a slide to discuss that as well and recent progress on that front. And then lastly, so we went through that RFP process. I'll touch on the recommendation before the board to hire a firm that's part of today's action. Next slide. So just real quickly, this is kind of graphical approach to the 3 main work responsibilities or work efforts that are covered under the LATA grant, we like to call it. There was $1 million awarded in 3 buckets: the high-level design, the programmatic EIR, the Joint Powers Authority. It is somewhat fungible in between those buckets, but we need approval from the Public Utilities Commission. The high-level design, a portion of that was already obligated for our work with the Golden State Connect Authority. Approximately $50,000 to $60,000 was our MOU max. And then the programmatic EIR had a budget of $350,000, and there was fairly considerable budget for the Joint Powers Authority at the time, but as I'll get into it, the decision to choose one of the simpler options will allow maybe money to do other efforts that will actually lead to more implementation. Next slide. So high-level design. I mentioned our effort to work with the Golden State Connect Authority to submit the applications back in September. We're still on that timeline of anticipating award announcements in March or April. We had a discussion, county staff and SBCAG, myself, yesterday with the Public Utilities Commission. I think if you advance, they pop up, the regional areas, so you can just go through those, Lauren, thanks. And so those 4 locations are identified there, the city of Guadalupe, and then 3 in the unincorporated areas, Cuyama, New Cuyama, the community of Los Alamos, and then Casmalia. Those were high priority locations in the broadband strategic plan. But there were other needs as well, but we had to focus in on some of the top priority locations. There also is an opportunity, like I mentioned, to continue that effort for more high-level design as we're going into 2024 further. Next slide. One of the focus items for today's presentation was the point of hiring a consultant for the programmatic EIR. This was a recommendation, again, that came out of the Broadband Strategic Plan. The purpose of the program EIR would really form an environmental baseline for future last-mile installations that could be used by local agencies or private entities to apply for funding or use that as a kind of a screening, and they can tier off of that as they're getting closer to projects in their community. The RFP process was conducted starting in the fall of last year. We received 2 proposals, one from ESA, who's being recommended, another from Rincon Consultants, both very highly qualified. It was we did interviews and we evaluated the proposals, and per the LATA grant, the County of Santa Barbara staff also was participating in that, and so we're recommending that the contract go to ESA. They just seem to understand the work that we had done to date in the Broadband Strategic Plan, where the PER needs to go to leverage future opportunities for local agencies and private entities. And so that was part of the recommendation. The max amount would be $350,000. That's the budget in the LATA grant. But what we'll do is issue task orders initially, but not exceed that. So that would be part of the recommendation I'll go through at the end. And then the last part of the LATA grant work tasks or work efforts that were funded were the recent was the establishment of a Joint Powers Authority. So here's some recent activities. I've communicated with SBCAG Council on this, so if Susan has any things she wants to add as well, or if you have any questions, I'm sure she can answer that. But essentially, in October of 2023, there were 4 options presented to this board. What the board chose at that time was essentially looking at a way to amend its current JPA agreement. I'd like to mention at this point in time that the staff report may say that we were amending the bylaws, or it does say that. So that was in error. It's the JPA agreement that needs to be amended. And there was language that was provided to the board at the time that was approved as option 1 to pursue circulating that around to member agency legal counsels. And so progress has been made on that to the point that we're anticipating that by the end of this month, that should close, and then there'll be an opportunity to begin circulating those changes through the member agencies starting in April. Next slide. And lastly, this is just to kind of show, like I mentioned at the very outset, is there's a number of different initiatives we're working on under broadband, but if you focus on the left there, those are the 3 silos of the LATA grant that we're working on. The program EIR is left, so we've started the consultant selection process. If the board approves the award of the contract today, it'll be a 1-year process to complete the programmatic EIR. The plan is to have that completed by early 2025. That's still within the overall 2-year time frame of the LATA grant. And then, like I also indicated, we've done some high-level design with the MOU with the Golden State Connect Authority, but there are other opportunities to initiate other priority areas and hire consultants to do that for us. And then I just provided the update on the JPA as that would continue. On the right-hand side of this graph is the effort with the Golden State Connect Authority. So we're still waiting, as I mentioned previously, on the award announcements for the 4 priority locations. But if we're successful, and if we know by April of 2024, in a couple months, then based on their schedule, they would immediately initiate the process to obtain permits for those 4 locations and then get into implementation in 2025 and have it complete by 2026. And then there's an opportunity as well, as we're conducting this, is to kind of start working with our local agency partners to identify new locations for high-level design or any initiatives that they have. So we'll start bringing that forward in the coming months. Next slide. So lastly, just to bring the recommendation back to the board, is that today we're asking that the board approve and authorize executive director to execute agreement with ESA, Environmental Science Associates, at a not-to-exceed amount of $350,000 for the programmatic EIR. That would also include approving and authorizing the executive director to sign task orders to implement the work going forward. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Fred. Questions from the directors? Director Hartman.
So this is really exciting. I guess I have 2 questions. One, we were working at the state level to change the law so that SBCAG can be, to qualify. What's the status of that?
It passed.
So we now can get the money
When
directly.
there's money available.
Yeah,
Right
yeah.
now, there's not. But when money is available, we can now apply directly for those funds. And so that's set up, the structure's set up in Sacramento. Mm-hmm.
And I guess that is my second question. At the federal level, there was $60 billion. I think at the state, there was $6 billion. So we're working through the 3 projects, but do we have our eye on the next set of projects that we'll be applying for?
We have our broadband strategic plan that documents a number of other priority areas, and so that gives us a leg up on being able to just jumpstart those projects. What I didn't have time to go through, but we could, was in that one slide that said next steps, there was kind of a little square that said BEAD funding at the federal level, and so that is something that would be available in spring, and we're keeping our eye on that. It requires a kickstart of what they call an appeal process, whereas if you have a project but there might be service, someone claims that there's service in that area already, then it has to go through that open process. But then we're still thinking that would be available by this summer. So we can immediately look at that. There's some other funding opportunities also through the California Public Utilities Commission. In addition to the LATA grant, there's a number of other ones we just got an update on yesterday. So,
and one final question. I think the 154, there was something that was going to be funded by the state, and then they declined to fund it, and it's really important for resilience, particularly South County. Could you elaborate what I'm talking about so I understand it better?
I think when I last reported some update last fall, with the ever-changing maps that were going on, there was what we were calling initially a phased one approach. Ultimately, the funded phase one didn't include Reach Up 154, which was really a priority for our region as you noted, Director Hartman, for resiliency's sake. But we're hearing that there's other endeavors out there, either from the private industry, ISPs looking to pursue that, or even the separately funded North County Fiber Ring project has portions on 154 that the Econ Alliance and the San Ynez Man and Chumash Indians partnered together on. So there are some additional opportunities. We know how important that is, so we're keeping our eye on that.
Yeah, so I was wondering if we were going to apply for any other grants for that.
Yeah, and I think what's really helping us with this too is as we advocate for funding, we have that strategic plan in place so we can overlay our priorities as the funding comes available and continue to advocate for that need. So that like we wanted the 154 and Gaviota coastline is kind of part of our priority areas there. And so because we have that strategic plan in place, we're able to really push and advocate and communicate as just in real time as this money comes.
I've learned in government it all starts with a plan.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody from Santa Maria with questions?
None up here.
Do we have any public comment on this matter?
Chair Lavalina, we have no request for public comment.
Okay, so then I need a motion for items 1, 2, and 3.
So moved.
Moved by Director
Second.
Hartman, seconded by Director Perotti.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Thank you. Capps.
Aye.
Hartman.
Aye.
Nelson.
Aye.
Osborne.
Aye.
Infante.
Aye.
Julian.
Aye.
King.
Aye.
Patino.
Aye.
Perotti.
Aye.
Clark.
Aye.
Rouse.
Aye.
And Chair Lavanino.
Aye.
Motion passes 13-0.
Takes us to 5E.
5E, Active Transportation Program Development of Cycle 7 Metropolitan Planning Organization Guidelines. Approve option for development of large metropolitan organization guidelines for Santa Barbara County for the Active Transportation Program.
Right. So thank you, Chair and Directors. Jackie Mata, Transportation Planner at SBCAG, and I'll be presenting on the Active Transportation Program Cycle 7 MPO Guidelines. So the purpose of today's presentation is to approve an option for development of the Large Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO as I'll be referring to it, competitive guidelines for Santa Barbara County for the state's Active Transportation Program. Next slide, please. So some basics of the program is that it's a state-administered program by the CTC, the California Transportation Commission, and the CTC conducts a call for projects. It's a competitive process every 2 years that includes 4 program years. And so we anticipate approximately $555 million in funding for this cycle, pending the 24-25 budget resolution. And so this pot of money is divided into 3 pots: small, urban, and rural, which is 10%, large MPO regional pot, which is what I'll be talking about today, and the statewide pot, which is 50% of the funds. Next slide, please. So starting cycle 7, SBCAG is now considered a large MPO, and this is when the Santa Barbara urbanized area crossed the 200,000 population threshold in the U.S. Census. So previously we were eligible for the statewide and the small urban and rural pot, but now we're only eligible for the statewide and the large MPO pot. So our region will now receive a population share of that 40% that I talked about before of that large MPO pot, and it's estimated that our share would be $2.8 million in funding over the 4-year period. And so large MPOs are responsible for overseeing a competitive process, and that's what we'll be deciding on today. So next slide. So we presented several options to TTEC and starting in December, and even created a smaller group, TTEC Ad Hoc Committee, to discuss these options in more detail. And so this slide shows just an overview of all the options, but the next couple of slides I'll go into more detail. But option 1 is to delegate ATP project selection. process to the CTC. Option 2 is to develop our own SBCAG regional guidelines for a standalone ATP call for projects. Option 3 is to combine ATP funding with Measure A North County and South Coast Safe Routes to School bike ped programs. And then option 4, which is what TTAC recommended, is to develop SBCAG regional guidelines for a standalone call for projects, but with a north and south split of funds. Next slide. So again, option 1, this is to delegate project selection to CTC, and agencies would apply in the regular statewide process, and the CTC would basically fund the next project based on their highest score. So the pros of this is that it would fund projects that couldn't be funded by the statewide plot. The cons are that the ATP application is very time-consuming. It's a competitive, even more competitive than other statewide processes, and some smaller agencies don't even apply. So the agencies that don't apply wouldn't be eligible for these funds. And also the requests for ATP, the requests are fairly large. So the majority, if not all of our 2.8 million would probably only go to one project versus several projects in our county. Option 2 is to develop our own regional guidelines and do a standalone call for projects, making the application similar to our existing Measure A bike ped programs that a lot of agencies are already familiar with. The pros are that agencies don't have to apply through the statewide process, and it's similar to a program that we already have. The cons would be that this is another application that agencies would have to submit. Option 3, next slide, Sarkis. Yeah. So this option 3 is to combine ATP funding with Measure A, North County, South Coast, the bike ped programs, and to split our share between North and South based on population share. And this would allow agencies to apply for one process. The pros is that agencies don't have to apply through the statewide process. The cons are that we're unfortunately not able to do this in Cycle 7 because the North County Measure A bike ped program is already underway. And then there's also certain requirements with ATP that we have to follow. One of them being that 25% of the funds have to benefit a disadvantaged community. And another is that some of the funds will be federal funds, which comes with more requirements for local agencies like completing a NEPA environmental document. And then the last option, which was recommended by TTAC, is to develop SBCAG regional guidelines for a standalone call for projects, but splitting the funds between North and South. And so the pros are that this application would be similar to our existing Measure A programs. The cons would be that it's another application. And next slide, please. So TTAC ad hoc committee and the TTAC committee both recommended option 4, which I just went over, and the reasons being that they like that it's separate from the statewide process. There's not a lot of funding to go with option 1. So with option 1, you may only fund 1 or 2 projects. They like the North and South split of funds, so this will provide geographic balance of the funds. And there's the concern of commingling Measure A funds with federal funding that the ATP share has, since there's more requirements. And then lastly, the disadvantaged community requirement, which Measure A does not have. Next slide. And so this is the schedule of when we plan to bring the draft MPO guidelines to TTAC and the board, and then the final guidelines will be coming in April, and then we have to submit a draft of the guidelines to CTC for their approval because they have to approve it, and we'll have to submit that in May. And I think, yeah, that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions, and again, we're looking for a recommendation for an option.
Thank you, Jackie. Any questions from directors? How about in Santa Maria?
Yes, Director Nelson has a question.
Yes, thank you, Chair Lavanino. I was a little
Hey, Bob,
concerned
get
about
closer to the mic. We can't hear you very well, if you could.
Okay, is that better?
Yep, a
Can you hear
little
me
bit.
better now?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. My concern was about the amount of money available. I heard 2.8 million. I know that in the last ATP grant cycle, we were awarded quite a bit more throughout the county. So I'm trying to square that, that only be allocated 2.8 to our county.
Okay, I can, Chair. So Director Nelson, we are still eligible for the 50% of the 555 million through the statewide pot. We are no longer eligible for the 10% or about 50 million through the small urban pot any longer, unfortunately, because our region did really well in that pot. We are now receiving a portion of the 40% large MPO, which is 2.8 million. So our region is still eligible and competitive for the 50% of the 555 million. We're no longer going to be eligible for the 10% through the small urban pot.
So in the large MPO pot, that's programmatic? Is that what I'm understanding? That's just because of our population, we get 2.8, or is that something that we have to compete for?
Yes, that is correct. The 2.8 million represents our population share of the 40% of the large MPO pot. So we're sharing it with the other 17 large MPOs in California.
And how much did we receive prior, before when we were in the smaller pot on an annual basis?
I'm sorry, it was hard for me to hear the
He
last
wants to know, how much did we used to receive historically before we joined the large MPO, before the 200,000?
We were, go ahead, Jackie.
Last cycle, we received 80 million, but that includes, yeah.
The last cycle, we were able to secure 80 million with the caveat that the state added 1 billion to the 500 million, so it's a larger pot. Before that, in a normal period, we were receiving about 40 million every cycle for our county.
And we're now talking of going from 40 to 2.8. Is that what I understand?
Again, sorry.
That's correct.
Yes. Yep.
It's pretty
Well,
alarming.
no, I'm sorry. It doesn't go from 40 to
Wait.
2.8.
The 40 million was out of the two pots of funding that were available.
Okay.
The statewide pot of 50%. So we competed well there too, but we also competed well in the small urban. So that 40 million was both of those pots. Now we're eligible for the statewide pot that continues to be eligible. So we don't know what we're going to do in the future, but we're guaranteed 2.8 million.
So out of that 40 or 50 million, I think what Director Nelson's trying to get to, what came out, how much did we used to get historically out of that small pot?
It was only 55 million, so it can't be 50 million. So
It wasn't, okay, so it wasn't 50 million, but we were receiving about 3 to 4 grants per cycle from the 10% pot. So we were not to brag, but we were getting about half the money from the 10% pot.
Okay. Yeah. So it's going to be a significant
it's a loss, for sure. And we advocated to keep us in the small urbanized area, but we were told, no, we're too big. So
yeah. So to use the metaphor that Lauren was friendly nudge to my, we were a big fish in a small pond and a small urban pot, and now we're becoming a small fish in a very big pond with the large MPO pot.
Well,
Director Nelson, anything else? Good question.
No, just disappointing is, I guess, the ultimate reaction I have here. I'm indifferent. The only question I have about us having our own process, that it sounds like it still needs to get approved by CTC. So, why would, or is that going to be are they just going to rubber stamp whatever we agree to?
Yeah, the guidelines, we have to develop them and they still have to be approved by CTC.
And at that point, then they would be willing to allow our guidelines to be the determining factor on how those the revenue was allocated?
Yes, for that 2.8 million in funding.
So when we
hold on, I think his question was whether or not they're not going to be just rubber stamping our projects. They're rubber stamping what the guidelines are going to be.
And they're not rubber stamping.
Yeah, exactly.
Correct?
So, and then we'll form a scoring committee, and so we'll be deciding on the projects. And so they'll ultimately be approving our projects, but it's going to be our decision.
Correct.
Okay, I would hope that we have some additional robust discussion about, eventually, I do like having a local process, but I think we all should be looking at having that flexibility to maybe spend, all of it in one area versus just, split it down the middle based on population and do it programmatically. Obviously, we've been able to leverage more to be able to have a more robust conversation about those funds if we have some flexibility. So I think a SBCAG process is great, but I think we want to make sure there's some level of discretion for the board in the future with our guidelines to be able to move it where it's most needed.
So, yeah, so we do have the slides back up on the options. So through the chair, option 2, Director Nelson, would take that $2.8 million and just do a countywide call for projects with the $2.8 million. The option 4 was being mindful and respectful of TTAC's wishes with making sure there was an equitable split between the north and the south. And so that would, in a nutshell, there's about 52% of the population in North County. So 52% of the 2.8 million would be North County, and then the balance would be the South Coast. So we did present the countywide option to TTAC under option 2. The other just final point, the board does have the discretion to have a different set of guidelines for the next cycle of the program in cycle 8. So if we go through this process and feel like there's lessons learned, we can come back in cycle 8.
Cool.
Well, I think that option 4 makes a lot of sense once the the STIP dollars are now spread countywide. But right now, while that's still being allocated specifically to South Coast, especially on the projects on the 101 widening and some of the, active transportation projects that go along with that, this seems to be a pot of funds that we might be able to move north to help create some equity while we move forward with the 101 widening finishing up. So, once things are back and leveled out, that makes more sense of north-south split. But until we get there, I think this is one of those revenue sources that we can spend in the North County to try to move some of those projects along. So I would support option 2.
Director Hartman?
I had a couple of questions. First of all, ATP money will be less because of the state budget, right, this year?
Through the chair, so currently CTC has adopted a fund estimate for the program based on statute. So the state budget has not been approved yet. So they're not going to do anything until August until the budget is approved. One option is potentially backfilling the $200 million through other state funding, or trying to lessen the pain and maybe have the $200 million spread out over multiple cycles. So we're monitoring that with Lauren and Gus to see what that impact is going to be. So there's no guarantee yet that there's a $200 million cut.
Okay. And my other question is really a larger one, and that is dealing with the applications for the state pot and a process. It's the city of Santa Barbara has done extraordinarily well, and has been generous in sharing what their strategy is. But it's also difficult, I think, for smaller jurisdictions and others to be able to compete. And I think it would be helpful if SBCAG developed a process or played some role in, because right now it's kind of everybody a free-for-all, and everybody just applies, and I think it leaves smaller jurisdictions at a real disadvantage. And so I don't know exactly what it would look like. We probably can't get it done by June, the time that ATP grants are due. I'm engaged in the free-for-all to fess up for the Santa Ynez connector, Valley Connector. But I think going forward, it would make sense for the county and the jurisdictions through SBCAG to think about what a more orderly process would be and how we establish priorities instead of, and again, I think it leaves smaller jurisdictions at a real disadvantage.
So thank you for the comment. And then just in terms of the large MPO pot, And thank you to Jackie for her work with CTC staff. She's already shared these options with them and to get their feedback. If we do any of the options 2, 3, or 4, we're using the local application process that the local agencies are comfortable with Measure A. So we're mindful of not making local partners go through an extensive application process. Regarding the prioritization of projects from our region for ATP, that's something that's a policy discussion we'll have to come back to your board on. It's something that we've never done before, but we're mindful that there are a lot of priorities and needs. And just a final pitch, we are planning on doing a local agency application workshop once the guidelines are approved, just so people are aware of what's going to be changing in cycle 7, and then we continue to support local partners in that manner as well. So in terms of the prioritization, if that's something that the board would like us to do, we can come back with options on that. It would be a little bit difficult for us now with cycle 7, but it's something that we could do for future cycles.
Any other board questions, comments? So just a question from me to Director Nelson. So on option 2, you're not recommending, or you're not asking that all the money would go to North County. You're just saying that with option 2, we're leaving it flexible enough that people would be able to, you could go either way, depending on what the project in question is.
Yes, that was what I was suggesting.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so is there any public comment on this issue?
Chair Lavanino, we have no request for public comment.
Okay. Can I get a motion? What's the pleasure of the board?
Well, nobody's going to jump in there. I'll jump in and make a motion for option 2.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, just clarify. So the only difference between option 2 and option 4 is that option 2 does not require a north-south split, but option 4 does.
Yes, and then I guess I'll say one thing. During the TTAC ad hoc committee, the North County staff members did want the split because they were concerned that cities that do well, like City of Santa Barbara, would compete well and take most of the funds. So that was the reason for the north and south split.
And just that is just something at staff level that we just wanted to share that with the board. There is that potential for one, we can develop, thresholds for no more than 25% going to a project, but if it's 100% available to any agency, there's that potential.
It's a dice roll. Do you take your guaranteed 52% or maybe get stuck with 0?
Can I get a point of clarification?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's still going to come back to this board, right, for approval? On that?
Through the chair, yes, that is correct, Director Nelson. Your board will still be approving projects, I think, in November or October after we go through the call for projects and evaluation.
Yeah, so I think that this board can look at that objectively and be flexible with each other. I don't think anybody's looking to, penalize anybody. I think, I guess it's a dice roll, but it's really the 13 of us that get to do that. And that's not too much of a dice roll to me. I think we all worked cooperatively in the past, and this gives us that flexibility to do that.
Okay, you're betting on the generosity of other board members. I like that. That's good thinking. Yes, Director Perotti.
Thank you. I'm struggling. I think we all are kind of struggling with this one, but to be respectful to, you've asked the TTAC ad hoc committee for recommendations, and they recommended 4. I'm having a problem supporting another recommendation other than 4 at this point, based on what they have come up with. So.
Understood.
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
It is a tough one.
Does anybody want to make a motion, or we'll kind of see where everybody's at? Oh, we do? Director Nelson and Director Patino. That's correct. Let's call
it, didn't you?
No, Patino.
Oh, Patino did. Excuse me. Sorry.
Okay, let's call for a roll call. This is for option 2.
Okay. Director Williams?
Aye.
Aye? Okay. Caps?
Aye.
Hartman?
No.
Nelson?
Aye.
Osborne?
No.
Infante?
No.
Julian?
No.
King?
No.
Patino?
Aye.
Perotti?
No.
Clark?
No.
Rouse?
No.
And Chair Lavanino?
Aye. See, we can get along.
You
What
said
was
aye?
that, 7 to 6?
You said aye?
This would be really easy to split
Wait,
this money up.
did you say aye?
I was aye,
Okay,
yes.
so it's, motion fails 5-8.
Okay. Well, that was a good effort. Let's
Substitute motion, Mr.
yeah,
Chair.
sure.
I'll move item 4.
Option 4, moved by Director Rouse, seconded by Director Hartman.
Okay, let's go again. Director Williams?
Aye.
Caps?
Aye.
Hartman?
Aye.
Nelson?
No.
Osborne?
Aye.
Infante?
Aye.
Julian?
Aye.
King?
Aye.
Patino?
No.
Perotti?
Aye.
Clark?
Aye.
Rouse?
Aye.
And Chair Lavanino?
Aye.
Motion passes 11-2.
Okay, thank you very much, Jackie. Appreciate that. And that takes us to item 6, Executive Director's Report.
Mr. Chairperson, members of the board, appreciate the robust discussions we had all day today. It was very productive, so thank you so much. I do want to share with you, it was on your consent agenda, but we did announce that Bob Tiffany has been appointed as a California Transportation Commissioner. This is the first commissioner that we've had from the Central Coast. He was on the, he was a Board of Supervisor for the San Benito County Board of Supervisors, as well as a member of the COG Board for San Benito County. And we're really pleased to have some representation from the Central Coast on that very important decision-making body. Speaking about the Central Coast Commission is going to Sacramento on March 20th. We've just heard that our volunteer, Director Hartman, is unable to attend. I assume that's confirmed?
We have a Board of Supervisors special workshop that day,
Yeah.
so otherwise I would wanted to go.
So if it's okay with Director Hartman, we'd ask for another volunteer to attend that. It's all day, well, it's leaving Tuesday, the 19th, and coming back on the evening of the 20th. So it's a good all-day commitment for somebody. So if anybody is available on March 20th to spend a day in Sacramento with all of us, please let me know. I do want to let the board know we're kicking off our regional transportation plan and a sustainable community strategy this afternoon at 2 p.m. We are having an in-person / hybrid meeting of our advocates and community leaders to walk them through the regional transportation plan process and identify the major issues that we're going to be addressing throughout the process. And it's just a way to touch base with them and kick off that process. So if anybody's interested in that, you can participate online or just come to our office at 2 p.m. And then last but not least, we are kicking off our Cyclemania, or National Bike Month is in May, and we try to start our planning a little earlier than May. So we're having a planning meeting. We're asking for volunteers to host events throughout the month of May. That planning meeting will be held at noon virtually on February 21st. So if anybody's interested in participating in that, or has any community groups that may be willing to host an event or two, please let them know about that. It was included in my Friday update, so yeah, the registration's available there. And that concludes my report. I'll turn it back over to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any comments on the director's report? We're all good? How about item 7, Caltrans District Director Report?
Hello, John Olenek, Caltrans District 5. Thank you for having me here on behalf of Scott Eads, our District Director. Just reflecting on being on the heels of some fairly significant storm events in the last few weeks, looking ahead to the next few days and next weeks of more storms. So just mentioning that we appreciate the partnerships that we have with your public works agencies as we work to keep the highways and freeways and roadways open and safe for the public. During those events, our emergency operations centers were open, and depending on what happens next week, that might be an option for us as well. So we're doing our part to keep everyone safe and keep the roads open as we can. Sent to you yesterday was kind of a last-minute addition to your reading material. It was introducing the Caltrans mile marker. It's our magazine. It's our strategic report. It's our opportunity to highlight the many accomplishments from around the state and provide statistics on the things that we are doing in the 12 different districts and the over 20,000 Caltrans employees throughout California. And particularly to highlight that we were fortunate to have a spotlight within the document about the Alamo Pintado pedestrian bridge in Los Olivos. So wanted to highlight for you, it's hopefully something that brings a smile. I know we're glad to see that project coming close to its completion, and we're hoping to work with Director Hartman sometime in the beginning of April to have a nice ribbon cutting event, and certainly you're all invited to that. Next, I wanted to get back to, it's been a few board meetings, but I wanted to mention to Director Osborne a request about some sidewalk concerns in the city of Lompoc. And we, besides dealing with the storms, our crews have had that on their mind, but I want to report that we have materials on order to make the repairs. And as soon as we have a break in the weather, we have the materials in hands, we actually have to rent some equipment, and we'll be able to make those sidewalk repairs that you brought up first, so appreciate it.
Thank you for the update, and totally understand not fixing it until after we're done with the storm, so they aren't washed right back out.
Thank you. And then another recent request, as soon as yesterday at the sub-regional meetings, Director Capps brought up a concern about some school operational problems on State Route 192 near, I think it was a junior high school and maybe a preschool. Just wanted to, I wasn't at the meeting, but I heard a little about the request, and just kind of wanted to provide an initial response that we would love to work with you and the leadership to be able to, identify maybe what some concerns are. I've been through some of these efforts in other school areas. As we all know, the drop-offs and pickup hours are typically chaos, no matter where they're at around a school. And so it's an opportunity to develop a group, maybe even working with the school district officials to really get an idea of what the needs and concerns are. Maybe there's some school circulation issues and improvements that can be made. So working together collaboratively. So wanted to offer that as an initial response to work with you and with your leadership on that effort.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And then lastly, but not least, as you probably noticed, waiting patiently with us, we have some of our team from the Caltrans district here. And we've been able to bring on some new and very talented staff to Caltrans District 5, and specifically to work with Santa Barbara County. So not to go down a roll call, but what I did want to do was introduce Veronica Lazama here. She's with us here today. Veronica is our new branch chief for regional planning for both SLO and Santa Barbara County. And what that means that she'll be able to work directly with you. She might be here at times representing Caltrans, and certainly working with SBCAG staff to be able to deliver the many fine products and to help with all the administrative behind-the-scenes things, and to help bring good funding and good projects to Santa Barbara County, as our teams have done in the past. Veronica has lots of experience, over 20 years of experience in working in transportation, and has been a staff leader and at times executive director for the San Benito County Council Governments, our Central Coast Coalition partner to the north, which is an interesting connection to the previous announcement about our new CTC commissioner, Bob Tiffany, who, along with Mr. Rivas, has also originated from San Benito County. So we have a good alliance here and a good team forming to support.
San Benito County is killing it right now, man.
Bringing it in. Yes, we're bringing it in. So anyway, that concludes my report. Happy to take any questions or comments.
Yeah. Any questions for Caltrans? Anybody from Santa Maria? That might be a first. Right on. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Moves us to our committee meetings. Director Nelson, do we happen to have a Calvans board meeting update?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Lavanino. I guess the update is we're slowly deploying the electric van experiment. One of the things that what is being realized is that these vans are having issues on towing capability. So often a Cal van would be pulling potentially maybe a restroom along with them or other equipment, and they seem not to be able to handle that level of load. So They're only being people movers. We're finding most of our ag producers are only willing to take one electric van for every 5 gas-powered vans that they are willing to utilize. So there's definitely some concerns about them having the capabilities to be deployed effectively in the agricultural environment. So this is why we're doing it. We're going to learn a lot of lessons through this process that might inform the state and locals on, the evolution into electric mobility. So that's the update. We'll keep you informed as it comes along.
Thank you very much. All right, 1-minute reports, real quick. Anybody? Nothing? Anybody in Santa Maria? 1-minute report?
No. Oh, yes.
Congrats.
Yes, yeah, I do. This is
There we go.
Director
Director Julian.
I wanted to thank Caltrans and SBCAG staff for last January 31st meeting there in the city of Guadalupe for the 6 projects that were on full on display. So there was about 65 individuals present. So it was a good connection with the community. And thank Caltrans and SBCAG and Fred for being there. Thank you.
Yeah, that was an example probably of how a public meeting should work, where we had information and then broke up into separate groups and people were able to ask all their questions, and I think they all appreciated that. Anybody else from Santa Maria?
None.
Okay. Well, that adjourns this meeting. Our next meeting will be March 21st, 2024. And we